Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back to NPTEL, the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, an initiative by the Indian Institutes of Technology and the Indian Institute of Science. As you are aware, our area or our discipline is cultural studies, and we are at the moment in module 4. Today we are into the second lecture of module 4. Module 4, as I said in the last lecture, is devoted to cultural industries, cultural forms including new media and cyber culture. And towards the end of this module, we shall be also doing a recap of all the lectures in which we try to glean the important points, the seminal points, and the last lecture would be followed, the last lecture would be on a critique of cultural studies as a discipline and a methodology. Well, today's lecture is entitled The Commodity, and I think it rightly follows from our previous lecture that was devoted to the culture industry, and let's as always do a recap of the last lecture. In the last lecture, which was largely the points were largely gleaned from the culture industry enlightenment as mass deception, a very important and seminal essay by Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, in which, among other things, we find the authors saying that the culture industries, particularly mass culture, popular culture, have been in a capitalist setup largely in the service of capitalism, where it aids the perpetuation of the capitalist ethos. Following such, following the service, therefore, given by the culture industry to the capitalist system and capitalist ethos, there are some important fallouts, and these, as we found in the last lecture, are that ideologies or worldviews are under such a setup predetermined. The ideologies that we have, the worldviews that we have, tend to be predetermined by the culture industry in as much as it aids the capitalist system, and therefore there is a degree of social control which we may call a manipulation, in fact, of the consumers of mass culture, and ultimately we have an illusion. We live in a world of illusion where the commodity reigns supreme. This also leads to a maintenance of social hierarchy as is already laid out in a capitalist system of social relations. Then there is a consent to such an order, a consent that is manufactured by the culture industry, and there is more or less an acceptance of the signs and codes that are sent out by the products of culture industries, products which we will call, or we shall call, cultural forms. We also read from Barker, where we found that one is concerned, as he says, with the political economy of culture, even as one does a study of culture industry. right? As he says, that is, with issues of who owns and controls the institutions of economy, society and culture, and the way in which the corporate ownership and control of the culture industries molds contemporary culture. So, the essential question in when we study culture industries is this, okay? How does a capitalist system, how does in particular a corporate ownership and control of culture and culture industries, how does it mold contemporary culture, and what therefore does it do to us as partakers of such a culture? And then he says, in this sense, the study of the culture industries forms a necessary part in cultural studies. He's telling us why should we study culture industries in cultural, within cultural studies, when so many, their media studies, for instance, media studies forms a separate domain altogether, it's a discipline altogether, right? So in that sense, why should we study such, why should we study mass culture under cultural studies? And the answer is that, it's a matter of political economy. Who owns and controls the cultural industries that dole out cultural forms and products which have tremendous consequences for contemporary culture. That is why it is important to study cultural industries and aspects like the commodity. The commodity is the topic of discussion today. As always, let me therefore declare the key sources in this lecture, the key source texts in this lecture, from which we shall be gleaning the points and from which I may also bring out quotations or bring quotations to your notice, which I shall then also be explaining, okay, or unpacking. So the texts here are the Sage Dictionary of Cultural Studies, the Polity Reader in Cultural Theory, Media and Cultural Studies, and Key Concepts in Cultural Theory by Andrew Edgar and Peter Sedgwick. Many of these texts have already been included in other lectures. The Polity Reader in Cultural Theory is a relatively new text, okay, that we are bringing in here. Fine. So when we study the commodity, we are not only studying the commodity per se, okay. Along with the commodity, there are other terms that also come in, which are derivatives from commodity. For instance, commodification, right, is a term which we have to study along with commodity. Commodity fetishism, a clearly Marxist term, okay. So there are, even as we study the commodity, right, we are not going to study the commodity as an economic term, okay. We are going to study, let me tell you in the beginning, we are going to study the commodity as a cultural term, okay. A commodity also as an important term in political economy, right. Okay. So these terms are explained by Barker in the following way, okay. A commodity, simply put, is something available to be sold in the marketplace, okay. So we all know that commodity is something that we go out and buy, okay, purchase, in the marketplace, and it is a thing does not become a commodity unless and until it is exchanged, okay, in the market. Then commodification according to Barker is the process associated with capitalism by which all spheres of a culture are increasingly put under the sway of the market. So commodification from the term commodity, we see it as a process which is associated with capitalism. We will see more of this when we talk about Marx's analysis of the commodity, okay. But here he says commodification is a process associated with capitalism by which all spheres of a culture are increasingly put under the sway of the market. Next, commodity fetishism is the name Karl Marx gives to the process through which the surface appearance of goods sold in the marketplace obscures the origins of commodities in an exploitative relationship. So, to begin with, these are simple definitions which we are of commodity, commodification and commodity fetishism. We shall be talking about this in more detail in a while. So, when we study the commodity, right, the first person that comes to our mind from the point of view of political economy is of course Karl Marx. Okay? So, in a study of the commodity, definitely these are the terms, please look at the slide, that we shall have to keep in mind, right, as we relate it to the commodity. These are false consciousness, reification, ideology, hegemony and commodity fetishism. You are by now, at least if you consider some of the previous lectures that or discussions, okay, that we've been through, these are terms that you are already acquainted with. Okay, so it is important to keep in mind that the commodity has to be studied under a political economy framework, keeping in mind these other terms. Fine. So let's get back to the basics. And as I said also in the last lecture, to study the basics of the commodity, one has to turn to Das Kapital, the phenomenal work by Karl Marx. And interestingly, Marx does not begin his work with grandiose theories or grandiose abstractness or formulations, right? He begins with what we may call the basic unit, okay, the atomic unit, so to speak, of political economy, okay, of the market, and that is the commodity, right? So what the molecule perhaps is in a study of biology, the commodity is to a study of political economy. Now Marx says a commodity has, a thing has two kinds of values, okay. One is its use value, or what we may call its utility. Okay? Every commodity has a utility. Everything has a utility. For instance, this a pen that I am holding, it has a use value, right? Its value is that it has a certain utility. I am using it, right? A piece of clothing, okay, whether it is for exchange or not, right, has a certain utility or a use value, right? On the other hand, a commodity also has exchange value. That is, it can be exchanged, say for instance in a barter system, I may exchange a piece of clothing for a piece of a food item, for instance, or in a contemporary market scenario, commodities are exchanged, okay, against a common could say measuring device, say money, right? So therefore it follows that a thing may have use value and at the same time it may not have exchange value, right? Marx gives several examples also from the natural world and also from the world of our creations. For instance, I may create something, but only with a view to its utility, but I may not bring it to the market. Okay, so it is very important for us to understand that a commodity has two aspects: the use value and its exchange value. Okay, so use value is utility and exchange value when it is brought to the market. This is of course very simply put, but as I said, if we have to talk about the commodity, we have to begin from Marx. Okay, now what happens when the commodity comes to the market? Okay, we are now going into the whole idea of commodity fetishism, okay, where it is said that the social relations of production, right, become a relation, between objects. For instance, when a commodity is produced, right, there is a certain amount of labor that is engaged in it, apart from the raw materials, right, that go into that go as ingredients, right, into the making of the object or making of a product, right. So what happens with the commodity is that the social relations of production, okay, or say the labor process that goes into the production of commodities, okay, is hidden and appears to us, as it says here in the slide, as a relation between objects. Okay, so what happens is, as it is said, the commodity becomes a fetish. Now, fetish is a word that you are conversant with, or a word that you are acquainted with. Sorry, a fetish is something which you may loosely call an obsession, something which becomes an obsession, right, or something that is given an additional value to additional to what it is used for. Right? So you may have religious fetishes, you may have objects in religion that have become fetishes, totems, for instance, idols, for instance. Okay, there also may be intellectual products that have become fetishes. Right? Commodity fetishism means when the relations of production, right, that have gone into the production of an object are, and of course in the Marxist schema, the system of exploitation of labor that goes into the production of an object is hidden, okay, as the commodity begins to have a certain aura about it or a certain fetish about it. We shall see more of this. Here, as beautifully put by Marx, objects become subjects and subjects become objects. So objects here, under the commodity fetishism theory, objects become so important, right, that they replace, okay, they replace the social relations of production, they replace subjects, right. And similarly, the subjects, that is a social relation, the people engage in the social relation of production, particularly labor, they are objectified, or rather that is transformed into the object per se, or the commodity, right. Therefore, what happens is the price of a commodity, right, which comes about as which comes about through complex arrangements of the market, okay, which are man-made. The price of a commodity is, or the price of a commodity now seems as if it is a natural property, okay, of that commodity. Why? Again, as we have seen, the relations of production and particularly the system of exploitation that goes on in a capitalist system, in the sense that private profit or surplus is not shared, right, is not shared with the worker. All these are hidden when the commodity is transformed into a fetishized object, right. So in such a scenario, even the price of the commodity is seen as a natural property, as if it is already a given. Let's put it in another way, through this slide. Commodity fetishism is therefore related to the surface appearance of an object. When we, when we go to the marketplace, when we go to, to the malls, when we look at objects, when we contemplate buying them, right? What are we looking at? We are certainly looking at the surface appearance of the object, and you will notice that increasingly, right, the object is presented to us. It's not just the appearance of the object per se, okay. The surrounding environment of the object is, adds to making the commodity a fetishized one, right, highlighting or foregrounding the surface qualities of a commodity. So, the surface, let us look at the slide, the surface appearance of the commodity masks, okay, masks or obscures the exploitative relationships in production, right. When you are looking at or contemplating buying the commodity, when you are looking at the commodity, right, on the shelf in the marketplace, you are not looking, or the commodity is not narrating to you the story behind its surface appearance. It is not telling you where it has been produced, even if it has a tag, okay, saying that made in this particular country. You do not have an idea of where it has been, under what circumstances, under what environment it has been created. For instance, you do not know whether this has been created in a sweatshop. You do not know, whether the laborers, the worker whose labor has gone into the production of this commodity, whether he or she has received the minimal wage, okay, for his or her work. You do not even, of course, contemplate whether that very worker will have access, okay, or can use the very commodity that he or she has helped create, okay. And in general, that is, you do not, the commodity does not tell you, what has gone into its production, right. So, this is the word masks, the surface appearance, the beautiful surface appearance of the commodity masks or hides or obscures an exploitative relationship between the capitalist owner and the laborer, okay, the exploitative relationship, the very unequal relationship that exists, okay. So, when we look at the commodity, therefore, in cultural studies framework, we are to look at it first and foremost under this schema. Then we will now look at certain formulations given on, since we talked about the surface appearance, the beauty of the commodity, the way it, its aesthetics helps it to interpolate or to hail out to us that it is something that we need to possess, okay. We will look now briefly at an essay entitled Critique of Commodity Aesthetics by W.F. Hogg. In this essay, Hogg says that when we look at commodity aesthetics or the beauty of the commodity, what goes into the process of aestheticizing the commodity, so to speak, so that its final product is one that is pleasing to the eye, that is pleasurable to when we use it, etc. Okay. So, he says that, let's look at this slide here, it's only commodity, the commodity with its aesthetics is only a series of mirrors, okay, that is forced on to an individual, right. Look at this is very important, a series of mirrors forced onto the individual. Why should he use the word mirror? You are offered, therefore, through the commodity mirrors, right. These are commodities are mirrors, and it is forced on the individual. Why do you look at the mirror? You look at the mirror to see your own reflection, okay. So, in this case, what is happening, the commodity in its aestheticized final form, okay, is a mirror in which the individual contemplates himself or herself, okay. So, if you do not possess this beautiful commodity or object, then the reflection tells you that this is what you have to possess, okay. So, according to Hogg, what do we find that in the discourse of commodity aesthetics, commodities in their ultimate finished appearance, right, are really a series of mirrors that an individual is forced to contemplate himself or herself in a capitalist system. What does, therefore, an individual see there? In those mirrors, the individual sees or contemplates, or the commodity seems to be something that brings out these qualities, okay? Empathy, credibility, seduction, and attraction, right? The commodity both, according to Hogg, empathizes with you, okay? Empathizes with your desires, with your needs, and at the same time, you also empathize with the commodity. You know the difference between sympathize and empathize. Empathize is, more intense in degree, in the sense you identify, right? When you empathize, you identify, with a person or a situation, okay? So you may also use the word identify here. So secondly, it also tells you that it has a certain degree of credibility, and that is why you have to purchase it, or that is why you have to own it, okay? So there's identity or empathy, there is credibility, as the object speaks to you, that it is one which has credibility and therefore you need to possess it. It's also seductive in its beauty, in its appearance, in its aesthetics, in its final form. It is also seductive in the sense that you are seduced into procuring the object, and of course there is, in its aestheticized form, it is also one that is extremely attractive. So Hogg then points out that, in the mirror, so to speak, of commodity aesthetics, the individual perceives these facts, okay, of empathy, credibility, seduction, and attraction. So therefore, again, as Hogg says, in these images, people are continually shown the unfulfilled aspects of their existence. And we are reading from Hogg's essay, okay? People are continually shown the unfulfilled aspects of their existence. Again, these commodities that show their supposed credibility, their beauty, their attractiveness, etc., only when such a mirror is held up to the individual, okay, it only, elicits, okay, a sense of unfulfilled aspects. I remember, if I may share this with you, I remember an advertisement when I was in college, okay. So this advertisement showed a young lady, okay, smoking a cigarette, and the advertisement was of this brand of cigarettes called Virginia Slims, and the caption ran thus: "You have come a long way, baby." Okay, so what it was trying to tell the woman is, unless and until you smoked that particular brand of cigarettes, which was made only, purportedly only for women, unless and until you used that, you bought that commodity, okay, you have not arrived. Look at this, the caption: "You have come a long way, baby." So in order to arrive, it held up a mirror to women, when we were young, that if you did not smoke this brand of cigarette, you have not arrived, or you have not made it. Such is the great say interpellation, or the great seductive capacity, okay, in that sense that that advertisement was a mirror saying that you're unfulfilled, or you haven't made it, you haven't arrived, because you haven't consumed me, okay. So as you go on with your lives, you'll also see all these deliberations like these only help you to give you this powerful, give you this power to critically look at every interpellating commodity, right? Next time you go to, I do not mean it in a moral sense, but next time you go to the mall, you will understand, look at it in a different way perhaps, and you may study the mall and the way the commodity in its aestheticized form is presented to you. Let's continue to read on from his essay. Commodity aesthetics ideal would be to invent something, okay, something that is not there, okay, something that, well, as many would say, needn't be there, okay. Commodity aesthetics ideal would be to invent something which enters one's consciousness unlike anything else. Something which is talked about, which catches the eye and which cannot be forgotten. Something which everyone wants and has always wanted. Okay, so when you, the commodity, particularly the way it is advertised, okay, particularly the way it is, sort of the way it is aestheticized, okay. The ideal, also its goal is to create something which is, as I said, is not there and needn't be there, to create, something that enters into our consciousness and tells us that this is something not only that everyone wants, but interestingly, it is something that everyone has always wanted. You follow? So, all aspects of our life, okay, are shown to be unfulfilled. Aspects of our life are shown, to be kind of less successful, okay, if you didn't go for the commodity. So, cultural studies, if you remember some of the previous lectures, one of the very important goals of cultural studies is to study these, look at or to explore and show the signs and the codes, the meanings that emanate. All these are meanings, really. Okay, you've come a long way, baby. This is the sign and the message that has been given by the particular cigarette company. Okay, so therefore, cultural studies has always tried to show that there are issues of power. Okay, there are issues of power and politics, of economy, of economic power, social power, of cultural capital. Okay, in our cultural practices, our cultural practices are not, something that we do as complete agents with complete control over us. Okay, the commodity, for instance, is especially in its in its highly advertised and marketized form, right? The commodity is something that would rule us and would define our identities, define our levels of success, define our even our reason for being in this world if we are not careful. Okay, so that is why it is important to go through this kind of formulations. Therefore, Barker then says on meanings, we were talking about meanings a while ago. Barker therefore has this pronouncement on meanings in commodities. What happens is the design, a lot of research goes into how a commodity is, simply not that how a commodity is going to be produced. A lot of study, a lot of research, okay, goes into how a commodity is going to be designed. Now, as far as the designing of a commodity is concerned, we may safely say that there are two aspects, or there may be two aspects in the design of a commodity. One is its utility, its functionality, its easy, its ease of access and use, and the other part is its appearance. Okay, the way, its aesthetics, so to speak. Okay, so design and production of objects or commodities always go through a process of modification, as it's shown here in this slide. Okay, and in this process of modifying, okay, rapidly, okay, if you look at the contemporary contemporary construction of meaning, okay, and the rapid changes these go through, you will understand that these are backed by rapid modifications in design and production of commodities. So, if you look at this slide here, the design, modification and design and production of commodities leads to new meanings through representation. Okay, if you look at the way commodities have been sold in the past, or the way commodities have been marketed and advertised in the past, you will see advertisements today have come a very long way. Okay, they have changed. There's so much of study going on, even cognitive psychological studies of consumer profiles, and what would be pleasing to a consumer so much of research research goes into it. So this kind of modification, okay, of the object, both from point of view of design and production, create new meanings through these new representations. Okay. Then these advertisements, right, with their newer meanings. Why newer meanings? Newer because they keep changing all the time. Constitute again new identities, right? They give new identities because, as I said, their representations keep changing because of modifications of design in a bid, to get more and more people to buy those commodities. These advertisements are also give new meanings and constitute new identities. So this really keeps continuing in a chain. Okay, there are changes in design production, there is therefore creation of new meanings, right? And with the creation of new meanings, again there are creations of new identities. And once these new identities and meanings are saturated, then again becomes a whole circle, okay, of modification, of new representations, of new meanings and new identities. So it goes on ad infinitum. Then what happens is, it is not just a one-way traffic, okay, as Barker says. It is not a one-way traffic in the sense that the identities that have been created, okay, at the level of changes in design and production, the new identities that have been created and consumed and adhered to or accepted by people, these in turn, okay, they affect the level of consumption. Okay, for instance, if a new identity created by created as a result of new changes in development, in design and production, when there is a new identity that is created which is useful or which is accepted by people, which of course creates almost a fad and a kind of a fashion rage, for instance, in people. What happens if you look at this slide here? It affects, right, the level of consumption. If it is not something that is accepted by people, that too, okay, affects the level of consumption. And then the level of consumption would again feed back into the design and production, so much so they shape the production of design and production of that good. Okay, so as I said, it is a whole circuit, or it's a whole it's a very circuitous in a circuitous manner. Okay, design and production being modified create new representations, new meanings and new identities. New identities are taken or not taken up by people. That in turn, okay, affects the level of consumption, which in turn feed back into the original design and production, and which make new changes. Okay, new changes are made, and the design and production further go on, are modified to create further meanings and further identities. So this again is a circle really, in which the commodity is captured and encapsulated. Okay. Therefore, coming back to the previous point on capitalism, what happens is, in a broader sense, if we look at it from a broader perspective, something very interesting that goes on and something very seminal for us. Okay. In such a scenario that we have described all this while, things are commodified. Remember, we said that there are three major terms: commodity, commodification and commodity fetishism. So we've looked at the commodity, its use value, its exchange value. We've looked in quite detail about commodity fetishism. There's this last word that remains, that is commodification. So what happens is, in this system, objects, people, qualities, values, okay, signs, meanings, everything becomes commodified. So there's a commodification, right? There's a commodification not only of objects, but also of people, of qualities, even of values and signs and their meanings. Everything becomes commodified, so that we live, so to speak, in a sphere of commodity and commodification. Okay, such is the power of the commodity. Now, we will end by quickly looking at one or two formulations by different critics. And first, let's take up Adorno, since we are acquainted with him through our last lecture. Adorno says that when commodities are standardized, when commodities are used in mass culture, what happens is it leads to authoritarianism and conformism, right? So, authoritarianism is obviously the authority that is used, authority that is given by the whole process, by this whole circuit, okay, to the producer, to the capitalists. And on the other hand, there is a certain conformism of the masses, the conformism of the people who consume. Okay, we have done a bit of this in the last lecture. Nevertheless, quickly repeated, there is a conformism. There is a standardization to which people conform as far as mass culture products are concerned. Okay, so according to Adorno, this is an aspect that we need to keep in mind. Also, as some critics have, particularly like Richard Hogarth, for instance, have pointed out, many propose that working class culture, okay, people belonging to the working class, people who have cultural practices within working class culture, which are not really into mass culture or not also into high culture. Okay, some would propose there is a certain degree of authenticity in working class culture. Okay, and whereas in commodity culture, because of the surface, the surfaceness of of appearance, of aesthetics, etc., is a shallow one. Okay, so this is an important, and many Marxist critics, early Marxist critics, particularly cultural critics, had pointed to this, that basically working class culture, because it is out of this circuit, okay, is an authentic culture. It is rooted in labor. It is perhaps closer to nature, and it is more authentic, and it is more dignified for the human species, whereas a culture that is steeped in the market, steeped in the whole culture, on the cultural practices of the commodity, is a one which is a shallow one. For instance, Barker says here, thus, let's read from him, thus one of the central criticisms of the commodification of culture is that it not only shapes and disciplines cultural meanings, but also, this is important, also turns people into commodities. Okay, this is a very strong point being made by Barker. Okay, let's read it again. One of the central criticisms of the commodification of culture is that it not only shapes and disciplines cultural meanings, in the sense that, well, even if it shaped and disciplined cultural meanings, maybe till then it is not so, we could say it is not so harmful, if I may use the word. But the fact that it also turns people into commodities is one which would tie in with this whole understanding of commodity culture as a shallow one. Okay. Now, the example given here is this. For example, the promotion of the slender body as a disciplinary cultural norm for women centers on diet as a commodity as well as self-monitoring. Now, he is using the these the diet industry, for instance, related to the health and beauty industry, okay, which shows projects the slender female body as the most desired body. Okay, this is as the most ideal form that all female bodies should aspire to, and hence use the commodities that are being given to us by the diet and the beauty industry. Okay, he says that Barker says that it is a disciplinary cultural norm, that it is a regulated cultural norm for women, and it centers on diet as a commodity as well as self-monitoring. However, paradoxically, commodity culture offers us images of desirable foods while proposing that we eat low-calorie items. This is the paradox. Okay, on the other hand, you have food aesthetics, right? We have food aesthetics. Remember we had this lecture on consumption, and where we talked about eating out, and where we said that our identities are related to to food and cultural studies forms a very important area of cultural studies, and how desires, how palettes are even constructed, okay, and identities are also woven into this. In the same way here, okay, whereas whereas the slender body is shown to be the norm, on the other hand, you also have food industries, as he says here, offering us desirable images of desirable foods, while proposing that we eat low calorie items and buy exercise equipment, right? In the face of this contradiction, as Barker says, the capacity for self control and the containment of fat is posed in moral as well as in physical terms, okay. So I think Barker is adding another dimension here, is that we, in our study of the commodity and the cultural studies, we are we will begin with the most elementary the most elementary, you begin with the commodity as the most elementary unit, as an atomic unit, okay, of political economy, of production, distribution and consumption. That is definitely something we need to look at, because it's a basic formulation without which we cannot have these sophisticated formulations. But Barker is pointing to something else here, and he's saying, even if as we study it, we also have to understand that all commodities sometimes are or the commodity industries are at times also at loggerheads, in the sense that while the beauty industry and the diet industry gives you the ideal of the beautiful slender body, on the other hand, the food industry with with its desirable foods, okay, is at odds with the diet industry. On the other hand, even as it shows us that we're supposed to consume it, we also have coming along with it, okay, exercise equipment, low calorie food industries, okay, and all these things together give, almost one is faced with a moral dilemma. So the capacity for self control, okay, the identifying of a person even in moral terms, and it is couched in moral terms, okay. This is something that we also, I think, discussed in one of our lectures when we talked about the body, okay, when we talked about the body and the ideal body, how health issues are also moral issues, as it is shown by the health industry, right. And we'll end with Habermas. Habermas says rational citizens become non-rational consumers. Non-rational consumers, why? Because we give in to the seduction and the empathy and the attraction of these commodities. Baudrillard also says very significantly that the so-called use value and exchange value is proposed by Marx today, in fact, becomes sign values. Commodities have also sign values apart, because they have meanings, okay. There's some meanings and identities created by them. Apart from the use value and exchange value, we should also add this other element, which is, as he calls, the sign value or meaning creating value of the commodity. So commodity in that sense may also be called commodity signs. So let's move on to the discussion, where we have a couple of questions. For instance, what are the two kinds of values in a commodity? This is clearly a question from Marx, and we have to then say that if it's a 2-mark question, you simply say that the commodity as given to us by Marx, the understanding as given by Marx, has two kinds of values. One is its use value and one is exchange value. And if you get a 5-mark question, then you have to explain use value and exchange value, and how a thing is not necessary that the thing is also a commodity. A thing becomes a commodity when it has exchange value, okay. Otherwise, a thing has a use value, and things may have use value without becoming commodities if it is not, in a system of exchange, and then it doesn't have exchange value, right? Then what is commodity fetishism? A very important point, not only in Marxist theory but also generally in cultural studies, is commodity fetishism is when a commodity becomes a fetish or an obsession, right? It is not that it becomes something that we have to buy, it is an obsession for us without which we cannot live. The meaning is that when the surface appearance of a commodity, okay, hides or masks the system of relationship that underlies the production process of that commodity, okay. But in particular, it hides the exploitative relationship in the social relation of production, okay, where the commodity is shown, in its final form, final aestheticized form to the public, okay, and where it has no markers, it has no signs of what has gone into the production. It has no signs as to where it has been, usually it has no signs of where it has been produced, under what labor conditions it has been produced, what were the wages paid to the laborers, okay. Perhaps if those signs and markers were there, indications were there, one in a moral sense would think twice before consuming but that object. But in a system of capitalism, the commodity is shown to be something that we have to possess, where our identities are engaged, where meanings are engaged, okay, whereas we found in one of the essays here, where it is in fact a mirror, right, which is in which you should find yourself reflected, and if you do not find yourself reflected in that mirror, you are supposed, as I said, to be leading an unfulfilled, okay, existence, or even an unsuccessful existence. So in the commodity fetishism framework, therefore, objects or the commodities become subjects, right? Instead of people and their social and economic relationships being most important, it is the object which takes place of people. And the subjects, therefore people, also become commodities. This is so beautifully put by Marx, okay, where objects become subjects and subjects become objects. People become objects and the objects become more important than people. Finally, what is commodity aesthetics? And we say that commodity aesthetics, according to Hogg, first, commodity aesthetics is would be an area of study and research where researchers would try and enhance, okay, the aesthetic aspects of a commodity other than its utility. But Hogg here gives us a critique of and tries to show us what actually goes behind commodity aesthetics, and he calls it a series of mirrors which has been forced upon an individual in the name of creating empathy, credibility in commodities, which are and a certain attractiveness, which actually are a seductive device, okay, so that we may use and buy and use these commodities. So how does Baudrillard conceptualize a commodity? Baudrillard says that apart from use value and exchange value, today with the increasing aestheticization and the surface meanings, okay, the increasing importance in the surface meanings of commodities, what we have to do is we also have to say that there is another, there is another value, and which is the sign value or the symbolic meanings that adhere or that sort of surround, okay, a commodity because commodities are fetishized, okay. Well, I hope then this lecture on the commodity as a cultural form and a commodity as the basic unit of cultural industries, I hope this lecture has been important for you. Definitely this is not all. This is certainly not all that we can say about commodity, but at least I hope by introducing this topic to you and talking about things like the Marxist conception of use value and exchange value, of commodity fetishism, of the way we can critique commodity aesthetics, and the way we can see the interpellation, how it how in the capitalist system commodities are not given to us only in their utilitarian forms, but also in their highly aestheticized, highly advertised forms. I hope these are, this has been useful to you, and we shall remain with culture industries and cultural forms, and when we talk about in the next few lectures on media, on television, on new media, on virtual and cyber culture, etc. Okay, so thank you for now.